right, today's session will be recorded just to provide everyone in advance with that notice, and the recording of this session will be sent out following here shortly thereafter. At Polaris Athlete, we're excited to be building the future readiness platform for student athletes, and we're especially excited to be building that alongside Dr. Scott Grant. For those of you that know Scott, there's really no introduction necessary, and for those of you that this is your first opportunity to be able to hear from Scott, I'm excited for you because he has a lot in store for you today as it relates to what high school counselors need to know about the NIL era and how to lead proactively in that time. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the torch to Scott here and allow him to take the reins.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks for the opportunity to work with you, those of you that are here and those of you that aren't. So just quickly, as far as background, so everybody kind of knows where I come at this from my perspective angle. I spent the last 20 years in education. I was a high school teacher and coach for a while. I spent a couple years right after college getting my MBA, working in Division II athletics. I left there, taught, was an assistant athletic director. Then I became a high school athletic director, and I did that for about 3 years, during which time I did my doctorate in educational policy and leadership studies, with all of my research really around interscholastic athletics, educational-based processes. I also became a school board member during that time, which was a whole nother gamut of goodness. After that, I taught college business for 6 years, leadership development, programming. I started a company called Triple Threat Leadership in 2017, which has done hundreds of personal branding, social media, leadership development, NIL education across the country since 2017. In 2019, and here's kind of where the NIL piece comes into play, my family and I picked up and I became the director of ops outreach and leadership development at the University of North Carolina in their athletic department, primarily working with specific programs and teams. It was great. I loved it, but it was right during the onset of NIL, and following that was COVID. My family and I had an opportunity to move back home to Ohio, where I now teach at the University of Findlay, which is a Division II school in Findlay, Ohio. I'm the chair of the College of Education program, and I started working with schools in about 2021 across the country, really helping them understand NIL education policy and figuring out what that looks like at the high school level. To be honest, I don't trust a lot of people who have not been in the high school space to help you all understand what the policy means, what we should be doing, how do we support and keep kids safe, and move things forward to help pretty much prepare them for what we think might happen. This group is a little bit closer to my heart because I am the product of two teachers and educators, and my mom was a high school counselor. So I love the opportunity to be here with you all today and do that. You'll notice too, if you've done any research, I love creating things. My goal is to work on the school and staff side to really help you figure out what resources we need and then do policy guides. And you'll see a lot of these things on the Polaris Athlete Hub. Assemblies, presentations, whatever I can do to support you as you navigate this new normal, I am all in. So before we get started, I always tell people, disclaimer, this is for educational purposes only, but this is going to feel like a lot. So this is information overload. There's no other way to do it. There really isn't. You have to rip the Band-Aid. It's going to be a lot. You're probably going to need to rewatch the video, which is completely fine. But I just need you to understand that before we get rolling. Now, as most of you know, NIL is not a future conversation. And what is currently happening right now is kids are making NIL decisions. Parents, they're sitting down, and usually there's not a trusted neutral voice in the room. And oftentimes they don't necessarily know all the aspects to really ask the right questions to move forward. You're not a broker for NIL activity in any way, shape, or form. You're just a guide to say, hey, are you asking the appropriate questions? Is there the deeper conversation that's being had so that you're not getting sideways if you're moving forward from an NIL perspective at the high school level or as they transition into college? So there's three real important understandings about high school NIL that you need to take sight of before we dive fully in. Number one, NIL is not an NIL issue. I truly believe that. It's a leadership issue. It's a safety compliance issue, and it's ultimately an educational opportunity. I think it's one of the few times that high schools and educational-based athletics and academics can mesh together to really use a phenomena that's occurring to move forward what everything in educational-based athletics is really trying to do, to be honest. So as a school counselor, this is like something that's occurring that crosses all of the bridges that can benefit all of your students, not just student athletes. And once you start framing it that way, I think strategically everything else moves a little bit easier forward as you consider what next steps might be. Number two, college NIL and high school NIL are not the same thing. I hear it all the time. Oh, this is happening, this is happening. That often is not even remotely close. The whole goal of when NIL shifted, NIL policies shifted at the college level was to ultimately allow entrepreneurial activities and kids who are creating value unrelated to their sport do that. So I always give two examples. Will Ulmer was an offensive lineman from Marshall. He was a country music singer. Prior to NIL movement or policy that allowed it, he couldn't book gigs downtown to play, right? And people always think, well, that's not fair. And you're right, it's not. Or Danielle Hart, who is the artist, wanted to sell her art. Pre-NIL, that was an issue. That was a violation as a collegiate student athlete. The other three, and we'll talk a little bit about the creator economy. Most people don't understand that this is at all levels, and the true NIL value creation, especially when you're looking at some of those lower levels where a lot of your student athletes may end up. Chloe Mitchell was actually the first student athlete to monetize her NIL. She was a volleyball player at Aquinas College in Michigan, very small institution. During COVID, she started creating DIY videos on TikTok, generated 1 million followers, and started to monetize. She was the first one to actually do it. The kid in the middle, Connor Prince, played basketball at Claremont McKenna, literally played 16 quarters in about 4 seasons. It's not about their athletic ability. It's about oftentimes what's the value they're creating, and many times it's on the creator side or just the value they can create for organizations and articulate what that might actually look like moving forward. I always ask adults too, like if you ever remember Blue Chips, like this is really, if you've not watched it, you need to watch it because most of the things that have occurred in that movie honestly happen at the college level. As bad as that sounds, given tractors, there was an Ohio State football player whose family signed it, or he signed an NIL deal and he was a farmer. And like they literally got equipment and machinery. So always something interested. A lot of this is now legal in air quotes, but it's really important to understand those are different. The last thing, NIL policies are going to continually change. All of you are very different schools and very different states. Rules and regulations are going to be added, deleted, analyzed over the next few months, years. But the goal at the high school level from a policy perspective is always to remember that it's to separate NIL activity from interscholastic athletics, okay? And that doesn't always happen, but as a policy person, that's really important to be informed about. When that starts to cross, and whenever you see that, like if a kid comes to you and starts talking about NIL based on his high school interscholastic athletic participation, that's where it starts to be gray areas and red flags start to really push forward because almost all state policies are written to separate those two components. Now, some of you see this all the time. They'll throw around these maps, and depending on what type of school you are, where you're at, these maps can be very, very deceiving. You have to be really, really careful, right? Because state associations, there's public school state associations, private school state associations, state laws, et cetera. So a lot of times people are always like, oh, what does it mean in Maryland? Well, you have the Maryland Public School Association, you have the Private School Association, the private school IAM, the MIA doesn't necessarily have NIL regulations, but they have to abide by the public school regulations because they sign a competition waiver. So this can get real convoluted. You're not going to know all of the policies, right? Like I study policy all the time. I've written 3 of these policies. Like it is very, very tough to stay up, but you need to at least have a little understanding of what does our school have to abide by from a state policy perspective. Ultimately, what we've found and what I've seen as we look at the transition over the last 4 or 5 years at high school NIL, most people and businesses who get in trouble or do something wrong or something happens, they just don't know. They don't know what the NIL regulations related to high school student athletes are. People inside the school building don't know what the regulations are. And a lot of what I do is I serve as an interpreter to help everybody get on the same page to be able to lead that forward. So today, what we're really going to dive into is what I've created. I call it the high school NIL leadership framework. And there's 3 pillars to this. The first pillar is going to be a lot of information, awareness, and understanding. We're going to talk through some pieces so you can have a little bit of a background. I always say people know enough to be dangerous. The second part, we're going to discuss some analysis and preparation from becoming NIL ready. Now, whether that's NIL ready from your role, whether it's NIL ready thinking about your entire school, it can look a little different ways, but I'll equip you with some questions and some things on where you may see it from a student perspective. And then the last one, we'll talk about leading forward and developing an NIL education program pathway and support for students, families, your school, and what that might look like. The biggest thing is you're not going to become an NIL expert, right? There is no such thing as an NIL expert. It is shifting all the time. The goal is to try to figure out how do we build knowledge, systems, communication, all these things to help support the people who we serve every single day. So pillar number one, NIL clarity and understanding what it is, what it isn't. And most of you probably know, and you've heard this before, NIL is actually a noun, okay? So name, image, and likeness are three elements that refer to a legal concept of an individual's right of publicity or promotion. Every single person, has the ability to control this. So it has nothing to do with interscholastic athletics. That's really, really important. Now, most people can go through and say, yep, I get it, name, image, picture, GIF, video, and then likeness sometimes throws some people off. It's some sort of easily recognizable visual representation, right? And most of the time, you think of this in terms of logos or caricatures, but there are high school kids around the country that have their own logos, that are creating their own merchandise around those logos and monetizing in that way. And sometimes they don't really know what they're doing. Sometimes they're doing, I had a kid who was doing it as part of an entrepreneurship program in one of his classes. So there's a lot of ways in which this looks. It's just important to really understand that. Now, the verb NIL activity occurs when a student athlete utilizes one of those pieces in exchange for some type of compensation. So they have to do something. There's a quid pro quo there, right? When you break apart all of the high school NIL activities or NIL activities that are being done across the board, they usually fall in one of these buckets: the merchandise, autographs, camps and instruction, appearances, product endorsements, social media promotions, postings. For high school staff, it's really important to understand that when you look at all the data, and the hardest part about high school NIL in general is there is no national data set from a high school perspective, right? So you're looking at college level data most of the time, and trying to figure out what that kind of is looking like at the high school space. But about 75 to 96% of NIL activity is around social media promotions and posting. Now, for school counselors, that's really, really important because that's kids utilizing social media platforms. How early are they doing that? If you have student athletes, we know that they're engaged, and what does that look like? And how are they doing it safely? The whole creator economy is continuing to boom. And Jeff has talked about this with a lot of you, that it's projected to reach about 1.18 trillion. And they're athlete creators. You may hear kids in the hallways or talking about like how would they create on their social media platforms. This is one, Sabrina Oosberg. She was actually a track and field thrower at Belmont. She was known as one of the leading NIL creators, and she now has moved into, she plays flag football. She has a unique story, but she figured out how to tell her story in a way from a creationary standpoint. You're going to see that increasing. There are students and people who are creating organizations around this creator economy, marketing agencies that are really working to help student athletes focus it. And this is why I try to get especially counselors and teachers to understand there are a lot of students that aren't athletes that are interested in working through NIL in professional opportunities, right? Agents, lawyers, financial people, marketers that are looking for opportunities to learn more about this space, not just the student athletes that are equating, oh, I'm good at basketball, so I should have NIL opportunities. Additionally, higher education is responding due to these types of things. Syracuse is starting the Center for the Creator Economy. So you're going to continue to see this start to be a large discussion at the higher ed level. And I think it's going to continue to increase at the high school level as well. From a student athlete monetization standpoint, and I go through this just so you can understand a little bit of what you might see if you start seeing things. Now, a lot of people are always like, we don't have kids that are going to do this, and that's completely fine, and I understand that. But it's important to realize like the majority of high school NIL deals fall within some sort of $60 to $100 range, and it's not compensation from an actual cash perspective. It's gift in kind, it's free gear, anything from that perspective. I usually tell counselors and staff, like, if it sounds too good to be true, if a kid walks into your office and says, hey, I'm signing a deal for 50,000, and you're like, okay, like, what are we doing? Now, if they walk in and say, hey, I'm getting a free bat. Now, some of you may have some of those elite student athletes, but you have to be careful with some of the misinformation out there. There are a lot of great people who do a lot of work in NIL, but then you'll see videos where it says there's an 8th grader making $60K a month. That might be true, but that's a lot. And they may have figured out that pocket. That's going to be a very, very small percentage of student athletes, and not something that you're probably going to need to be part of, because if they're making $60,000 a month, they better have an entire team of people helping them with that perspective. The NIL leadership understanding of all of this is really, there's no exact way of knowing what NIL activity is going to look like in your school community. And oftentimes when you show examples, it's people see the top 2%, but it could be the sophomore running phenom who signed with Brooks out of Ann Arbor, right? She necessarily doesn't look like what you would see the face of the Brooks, the people that you see getting drafted last night on the NBA draft, right? That's often what we equate to that. Or Michigan's baseball player who signed to get some free insoles. He was the first prep athlete to land an NIL deal. Or there's a volleyball player in Ohio who signed with a recovery organization that does stretching and flexibility. She was the first from the Columbus area to do that. Or the unique ones like the entrepreneurial engagement. There's a group of high school students who own a mini donuts stand in Michigan that signed the first Southwest Michigan athletes to be ambassadors for their program. This is great, right? This is awesome. This is very cool. This is something that I think you're going to see more of. But usually when you look at high school student athletes, they fall in one of these buckets. Some of you may have the elite athletes, the 2%, the high-level recruits, the Division I recruits. They're going to be signing with probably brands, and then they're going to be looking at some of that rev share. What's the college package look like? Some of those, that's high-level type of business elements that they need to have their processes put in place, right? Who is helping me understand all the financial components, the legal contract components, and that's not you. You're just making sure that they're asking the appropriate questions on what does that actually mean. You may have some people who are uniquers, the first family kind of connections, or people with unique names that are like a kid whose first name is Shaker and he's pitching shaker bottle companies, things like that, that it doesn't really necessarily equate to their athletic ability. Is what's unique about it. Like at the school where I teach, or I coach high school basketball, we have a softball player who's also a nationally ranked dirt bike racer, and she has tons of NIL deals through her dirt bike racing. And their parents came to me one time and said, "Hey, is this okay?" And it's like, yeah, as long as, right, OHSA doesn't sponsor dirt bike racing, so it's completely fine. Social media influencer, and this isn't necessarily the major millions of followers. This is the micro influencers, the less than 5,000 followers who have figured out how to engage a group of individuals that organizations want to be part of, or the all-American kid. I always tell people I went to a real small school that basketball was king. If there was an organization downtown that put together an appearance for that basketball player, man, every single little kid would have been waiting outside, waiting to go in. Okay. So it's really different to look at what these activities are. And the 2% elite are not going to be the norm for any of you. Some you may have bits and pieces here and there, but again, that is a whole deeper conversation to ensure they have some sort of structure in place to help them stay safe on a large scale process. Now, there is a transitioning occurring in NIL activity, moving away from those elite 2%. Those are always going to be there. But moving into things like contests where Diadora Marathon Sports put together a $40,000 NIL deal for the America's fastest high school boy or girl miler, right? This was something where if you run in their specific race and you win, you're eligible to sign a $40,000 NIL contract. They're trying to figure out of unique spaces in this environment where they can capitalize that hasn't been done. There are some that are focusing on cause or inspiration. So Dexcom U, one of my twin boys is type 1 diabetic, and he wears Dexcom, which is a continuous glucose monitor. They have an NIL program for student athletes where they highlight what it's like to be a student athlete diabetic warrior. That's an amazing thing, right? That's an amazing thing that sometimes people don't know is even possible. I actually just met with a kid in Texas, a stud football player. And as we're sitting there and I was talking about my family, he goes, "Oh, I'm type 1 diabetic too." And I'm like, hold up, right? Because it just opens up a whole nother conversation about supporting his family potentially with free medical services that are massive. You may start seeing some alumni engagement. Some of your students who have graduated may reach out and say, how can I give back to the school? And I talk to a lot of independent schools about this, where they may want to do appearances as a college player coming back on a weekend. For example, the person on the screen is Luke Montgomery. That's in the town where I live. He's an offensive lineman for Ohio State, and he signed an NIL agreement with a local company to do kind of like a kickoff before a game outside of their stadium. It had nothing to do with the high school players, and it was one of the largest attended games that they had. So it can be a fun, creative type of environment to support them in that way. And then you're also seeing some independent schools, and depending, this is often ones that have no rules or regulations. Spire Academy signed a $6 million jersey patch sponsor. They are not part of the OHSAA. So they don't have regulations that they follow from that perspective. Is this something that you'll see from some of those schools that aren't part of associations with policies? I don't know. But the evolution is continuing to occur, and we don't necessarily know what that's fully going to look like moving forward. The last part of the NIL deal piece, and this is something I always tell counselors is really, really important to understand, because a lot of times kids will come in and talk about it, or you'll be sitting with a group and they'll start talking about NIL. If you hear them start talking about NIL marketplaces or technology, so there are a lot of tech companies that are creating connectors. So in essence, if you've ever been on Facebook Marketplace, think of it like two people getting on there to sell something, right? It's the same kind of concept. It's where a fan and a brand is coming onto some sort of program to connect with the student athlete to do an NIL agreement. Now, the interesting thing about this is students over the age of 13 can start their own profile on many of these companies, as long as their parents are running the profile. And that can be a little bit scary of just ensuring that conversation has occurred. So Open Doors, Influence are two really big ones in the space. There are high school students that utilize these programs. If you've never seen these before, again, kids will make a profile that'll include their name and where they go to school, oftentimes clickable links to their social profile, and people can go in and filter. So let's say Triple Threat Leadership was looking to sign a deal with a high school student athlete or a college student athlete. I can go in there, I can open up a kid's account and say, okay, what are they all about? Where do they go to school? She has 16,000 Instagram followers. I can click on that, check it out. And then I could say, you know what? I have a daughter who's a track star, and I want to ask Maisha if she would do a post. And I can literally click and build a deal directly in this program and communicate that to her. I create a pitch. The pitch kind of gets accepted, chat details, they get an experience. Everything's paid through this platform. My biggest concern always when I'm talking to high school counselors and administrators is if you have student athletes utilizing this, and there are some schools that are going to like even supporting this, you have to be very careful, because if you have minors on here, you're not getting notified of like what the details are. If the family's not involved, I am always really scared of what if there's an appearance that's being booked and it's not a good situation, right? Like what are the pieces on top of that just make me a little bit nervous? Now, Open Doors has done its due diligence and all those types of things, but they're a gateway to help bring these together. They're not the ones that are actually, doing the deal. So just something, if you hear kids start talking about these pieces, it's really important to help them understand, like, hey, do your parents know about this? What does that look like? How are they supporting that process? The last couple pieces, the financial and legal implications, especially for school counselors, this is all taxable income. So NIL activity is taxable income, whether it's free merchandise, gear. That NIL taxable income sometimes comes with a surprise at the end of a 1099 that people weren't prepared for. And as you all know, NIL income can affect financial aid. It can affect FAFSA numbers, federal Pell Grants. There are state tax laws. if you have student athletes that are the elite level going to a school in another state and they're signing NIL deals with companies in another state, like all of those conversations from the family just need to understand, hey, that $10,000 NIL deal equates to about $5,000 after you pay all of your taxes. And what does that do to your bottom line from a tax overall perspective? And I think that's a conversation that's being missed on the front end. Number two, the contract and clauses perspective at the college level. When NIL first started, there were tons of clauses in the contracts that really were safeguarding the organization, and they're still there. A lot of times student athletes at the high school level, they don't know enough about contracts. Their parents may not have anybody look at it. They may be getting bogus contracts from companies that don't exist, with perpetuity agreements, exclusivity agreements. These predatory contracts can be a little bit rough. So again, it's how are we on the front end having the conversations with parents about there just has to be a deeper discussion around what this looks like to keep you safe. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying what is being presented is not a positive thing, but there's usually a deeper conversation that needs to occur. One of the last ones is social media FTC disclosure. So I do a lot of social media education for all kinds of students, but it's always interesting to me that one of the most frequently broken laws dealing with NIL social media posting is that kids don't understand they have to provide that this is an advertisement. They have to disclose that promotion piece. Now, people are always like, Scott, are they really going to go after the kid? I'm not saying they are, but we don't want to necessarily be breaking a federal law just in saying, oh, well, it's not going to happen. So you're already probably teaching digital well-being and most of those types of pieces. This is just another touch point for those kids where you'll see student athletes just start slinging it on social media from an NIL perspective. And usually it's, number one, not compliant with these regulations, or two, violating something that they didn't know they were violating in their state policy. The last one, and I know a lot of independent schools have international students. I always tell people, if you're an international student, and I did work with one that had like one of the world ranked tennis players, always get support from an experienced immigration attorney, because this can really be impacted their F1 student visa, where they can do NIL work, where they can't, what that actually looks like versus passive, active, inside the country, outside of the country. So if there are international students who are interested or engaging in an activity, that's just another touch point to keep everyone safe moving forward, to ensure they have their ducks in a row. There is a prediction and emerging trend coming right now, and this is something from a school counselor perspective. NIL agents and youth marketing firms are continuing to move downstream. And what that means is we're seeing them target a lot more of 10 to 14-year-old athletes, with major firms really going after those 15 to 18-year-old athletes. There was a kid in California who was 9 that just signed a 6-figure NIL deal with a sports agency. These are the Jolly Twins. They're supposedly the number 1 and 2 ranked kids in the class of 2032. You know, they have the Jolly Strap. They're building products. So this is becoming further down the pipeline of what our elementary students do. The interesting thing is, if you are at a school that has a state association that they abide by the regulations, often those regulations only govern down to 9th grade or 7th grade, sometimes 6th grade, but oftentimes anything under that, it's literally you're just following state regulations until you need the eligibility, and sometimes you've already crossed that up before you even get to that point. We even had a student athlete in Ohio. Ohio was one of the last states to pass it. NIL regulations a couple years ago. Our top golfer in the state actually forewent her last 2 years of athletic eligibility to sign with an NIL management company. She did that knowingly. And you're starting to see a transition to some of this where the elite level student athletes aren't even playing high school sports, because there are so many regulations on top of that. And some may come to you and say, hey, I don't even know if it's worth it anymore. You're starting to hear parents on the recruiting trail saying, I know we're breaking the rules, but if we get caught, we don't really need high school sports anymore. Now, a lot of that's anecdotal. Does it happen a ton? I don't know. It's just hard, because that conversation needs to occur and what that looks like. Additionally, there are agents and people in this space that are trying to move further down to take advantage of people who aren't as educated. There was a big article done recently about street agents that are asking or requiring 15 to 30% fees. Coaches are saying high school athletes are more at risk to be exploited because they don't have the support and structure of just understanding what to ask. 15 to 30% is massive. The common for even college and pro is 4 to 6%. So that's incredible. If you can Google and read negative stories about this types of stuff, but there are also a lot of really, really good people in the space as well. The final component, just if you have student athletes that you're working with that are really into club sports, which if you have the elite, they probably are, there's becoming an increased concern about how NIL is trickling into the club space, agents, handlers, what that looks like as far as communication. This can get tricky. I've had club organizations reach out to me to do educational seminars with them. And unfortunately, sometimes it gets to the point where like, how do we use this to make our team better? And I'm like, well, that's not what I do. So you just have to be very careful of those kids that are in the upper, I guess, ability and moving through these processes. They may start getting some of that even prior to the college recruitment from a recruitment standpoint in the club space. The next part, the NIL effect on college recruitment. So there's a new puzzle that you all are dealing with that in the past wasn't necessarily part of the conversation. And there's a lot of pieces to this. Some of you that you've had student athletes going to the Division I level right now, they're probably talking about the revenue sharing piece and the impact and considerations. A lot of colleges are doing an analysis of sport programs. So you may have student athletes who, maybe when they were sophomores, had targeted lists of schools, and those schools 2 years later aren't offering those sports. They're looking at what are the return on investments of the sports, what are the identities, the longevity and funding. And I'll show you some examples here in a second. There's a proposed federal legislation right now, the Protect College Sports Act, that's going to have an eligibility window, 5 years to complete, one transfer with no loss of eligibility. It's really hard for high school student athletes right now to figure out where they fit. College coaches are recruiting in the transfer portal because some of the ones that I talk to, and I do a lot of work in the college space, they are worried about the transitioning a high school kid into college when they can go get a junior that can immediately impact their team for 2 years. And that's a hard discussion and conversation as a school counselor, sitting with a kid saying, why am I not getting looks when they're good enough to get looks? But the college coach is only saying, I'm recruiting one high school kid this year instead of 4 like I usually do. That transition is occurring, and that legislation, we don't know what's going to potentially happen and the impact of that moving forward. The other part, you're starting to see coaches move often. The Dusty May thing, I mean, my boys told me that the other day. I was like, wow, that's crazy, right? All the kids who are now going to Michigan and what that looks like, roster spots, the national letter of intent transition to financial aid agreements, where that is now shifted. So that conversation is very, very different, and kids have to be an understanding of what does this look like from a conversation standpoint in the recruiting process. You've been in this long enough that oftentimes college coaches are really good recruiters, and they like to talk about a lot of really good stuff. And sometimes that's great. Sometimes it isn't always great. But as they transition, if they have some of those NIL opportunities now, you just need to be aware that student athletes are going to or currently have to submit, if they're moving forward, any NIL deals worth $600 or more upon enrolling at a Division I institution, right? Dating back to the first day of their junior year of high school or 7/1/25, whichever is later. And those are things too, where if you're not being explicitly told, or it's something that's not part of the process, and many of you may have that as part of your discussion, this shifts and changes all the time, and sometimes it's hard to stay up to date with it. I just saw yesterday Fort Hays State University paused its men's and women's golf programs. So I was thinking like, oh, what about the kids who were coming in the fall, right? They literally put a pause from a financial consideration perspective. You saw a couple years ago, Montclair transitioned men's and women's lacrosse to teams to club level. Arkansas said they were discontinuing men's and women's tennis programs, but then they all kind of revoked that a little bit because they started getting external funding to try to reinstate those programs. The question is, if a kid's going to one of those schools, how long is that funding going to last, right? Those now are conversations where anyone going to Arkansas to reinstate that tennis program, is that going to be around for my entire 4 years? I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying it's now a conversation that you may not have had to have, or you're scrambling last minute to try to figure out, is this the best place for me moving forward? The last piece, as they sign these financial aid agreements, the revenue sharing pieces, colleges are now starting to hold kids accountable to these contracts. So if you have student athletes come to you and saying, hey, here's the contract that the school is providing me, and I'm a little bit nervous. Yeah, some of these kids are entering the portal, and then all of a sudden you'll see, oh, they're returning to Washington because they realize they signed something else. But colleges are smart. They're not going to sign contracts that they're just going to easily let student athletes out of. And it's really important that student athletes are aware of what their contracts are looking like if they're in that elite level type of space moving forward. So this is where often the school counselors will see the NIL, those conversations in the recruiting process of, should NIL impact my college decision? And sometimes it's running the numbers. Sometimes it's getting them to understand what that looks like. There are some schools that like to use NIL activity over scholarships. I've seen that before. Well, they'll try to pump up the NIL activity rather than provide a larger scholarship to try to move that money around in different ways. Will NIL affect my financial aid? That's going to be a individual family by family conversation. Should I sign this contract? I don't think any of you want to say, yeah, that's a good deal, or no, it's not a good deal. You just need to say, are you asking the appropriate questions, and what do those questions look like? Some states allow high school student athletes to have agents. Some states do not. Some states require agents to be certified by the state. Some states do not. So if a kid comes in and says, hey, do I need an agent? You say, what are you doing that you would need an agent? What is occurring? What is happening? Because this might be the first time that you've even heard that they're interested in NIL, or an NIL piece has come across. And when they say, hey, this guy reached out to me, there's a level of due diligence that families and student athletes have to do in this space now, because there is no barrier to entry, right? Like, I could be an NIL agent. Ohio just passed a rule that marketing agents are now allowed for student athletes for NIL purposes. But what does that mean? That means Uncle Bob can be a marketing agent, right? And it can get really nerve-wracking, I think, for professionals in the school building that are worried about safety and of the student athlete and all of those pieces. Like, how do we help them? Some of them may ask about, how do I build my brand? Because that's a conversation that is just all over the place. Or even, what questions should I ask on my recruiting visits? If you have those student athletes that you know are going to get the NIL activity or the NIL conversations, like, when I've talked to student athletes, they don't know what to ask. They don't know how to approach the conversation. I will tell you, if it's the first question when you get on campus, that's not a good sign for you or for anyone involved. Every coach comes at NIL activity a little bit differently, and how they work that: football versus basketball versus golf versus female sports. Or it's really important that they understand and have done their research to figure out what that looks like, to be prepared before they're going. The last piece, before we'll dive into the last two sections, the mental health, identity, and pressure, and I always call this the weight beyond the deal. This is one of the largest topics that I think are going to continue to grow, partially because it's already a massive area of need and focus in the K-12 space and even in college. But when a teenager becomes a brand, and the pressure rarely shows up on that stat sheet, right? It shows up in your office or teachers' offices, people that they trust. And their identity starts to look at it like, I'm a brand and a follower account. And people, organizations want to be in this space to help them maximize and monetize. And oftentimes they're businesses that want to do that to support their own specific interests. And they have to be really careful on that. Kids starting to monetize the self as a minor in public view, that can be really tough. I talked to a kindergarten classroom last year, and I asked, who has a social media account? Like, almost every kid's hand went up. I was like, oh my gosh, like, it's not even legal yet, right? But my fear is, what does that look like in the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years as NIL continues to evolve? The comparison piece, I've seen, conversations around, well, this kid has an NIL deal, or they're watching social media all the time. I coach high school basketball, right? We just had team camp, and I look over and I got 3 kids scrolling through their phone. Now, they're not NIL activity student athletes, but at the same time in my head, I'm thinking, what are they doing, right? And we had the conversation about some of those pieces. The pressure from adults and parents to keep producing. So those kids that do sign NIL agreements, let's say you sign an NIL agreement, you announce it, there's all this marketing hoopla, and then Friday night you're the quarterback and you throw for 50 yards and get sacked 10 times, right? And that kid now is getting conversations of, oh, look at you, you were the NIL person, you're terrible. Or the company who just signed with you, and unfortunately, they're relating the success to the success on the field. Some of those pressures and really getting them to understand the work around who are you beyond the brand for the student athletes that are really working to maximize their NIL. This has to be folded into that digital well-being work your school is already doing. The burnout among this, I think you're going to start seeing a little bit more. A lot of times they'll say, when you're looking at an NIL activity, there's a time trap to it that most people don't see, right? The 3 hours, the hour of prep, the hour of communication, the hour of actually doing the activity. And again, a lot of the data is just from the college space, but they're saying, 35% of female student athletes feel mentally exhausted. But questions to keep on your radar around, like, for those that have signed the NIL deals, right? Like, has the pressure to perform spiked since the deal? Are you tying your sense of self to the brand and the numbers? Because now that they're looking at themselves as a business and people are telling them they have to do that, do they have time, which they already had a stacked full schedule, but now you're talking about content and shoots and invoices, and how does that work, right? What are their parents doing? What are the kids doing? What's that pressure look like? And it's really something that I've started to really worry about from a student conversation standpoint prior to engagement in NIL activity, because everybody makes it look like roses and, rainbows. Now, from a pillar 2 perspective, so that's the informational piece, everybody kind of there. The last kind of 2 parts is, what does NIL Ready mean for your school? What does it mean for your office? What does it mean for you? And really about analyzing and preparing for that movement forward. I always tell schools there's 5 questions every school should ask. And as a school counselor and someone that is very much a student advocate, who might have student athletes asking about these NIL pieces. Number 1 is, where does NIL information live in our district, right? Where are kids getting NIL information in our district? Because what I've seen in many places is it's not anywhere. So they're seeing what's happening on the TV, they're seeing what's happening in the college space, and then they just assume it's okay from a high school perspective. 2, what type of education and training are we providing to our stakeholders? So what are our student athletes learning? What are their families learning? Are they learning that together? Are we just giving them a class virtually saying, hey, here, check this out? Are we bringing someone in? Are we integrating something with our stakeholders? Does our board understand it? Like, who are the people? Do our teachers understand? I just spent 2 days at a school in Texas, and I met with 50 different teachers talking through what NIL was, how it might be impactful in the curriculum, because most of them had no idea other than, hey, this is what Texas A&M does, and they show it on TV, right? And that's totally different from that perspective. Number 3, how are you equipping families, student athletes with the right questions to ask when presented with NIL opportunities or recruitment? This doesn't mean that you're having to create them, but what are some of those pieces that they need to ask? Is there a guide, a question guide that we can give them? And I've created a lot of those things that we can provide to you. The last 2, how are we connecting families and student athletes with the right referral pathways? So for the kid that comes in who is getting a massive contract, that really needs to have someone look at this, like, who are we saying, hey, you really need to have somebody take a look at this? Or here's a school lawyer. I actually had a school I worked with, they had an open supplemental that a community lawyer had actually taken to come on staff, and he said he would look over any contracts that a student athlete had for the next level, college or outside, just to ensure they weren't, making any major mistakes or crossing them up, because the school in which they were working most of the families did not have support in any way, shape, or form. And he donated the money back from the supplemental. And it was something really unique that they had created as part of their program. The last one, how can we build a proactive NIL educational structure to support all students, which I'll talk about here in a second. From a counseling perspective, when you're looking at the calendar, and I know you all look about their life cycles, and many of you see them way before seventh grade, but the 7th and 9th grade piece, they're very engaged from the social media perspective. You talk about it from a career development standpoint, but it's also now, sport and NIL readiness. 10th grade, if they're integrating into some of those things, they really need to have a background of what NIL isn't those basics, financial literacy, how to spot a red flag. 11th and 12th, this is when it's going to start heating up and understanding what does that look like for the next step. So I always tell, if there's a kid getting recruited and they're doing NIL activity at the high school space, they need to be in constant communication with the compliance offices of the schools in which they're looking, right? Because if you're signing a deal with an organization in your hometown, and there's, the marketing firm of the college where you're going has a different idea when you're coming there, because now they can sign different NIL opportunities and support you in that. You don't want to get sideways. I've worked with a school with an elite student athlete one time. He said, I'm not even entertaining high school NIL deals anymore because I'm too worried about messing up the opportunities that I'm going to have when I move into the college realm. And then really just trying to help kids figure out if they're starting to see NIL opportunities, is where they're really deciding to go a good fit, or is it just a number that they're is making them feel a little bit better about that process, which I know is a tough conversation. The last piece, and probably my the part that I love the most from a leading forward perspective, and this is where I love creating NIL programs and pathways for education and application for schools. And oftentimes what I've found working with schools counselors have a lot of power in regards to, it's almost like the piecing together of you all are the heart and soul of the connectivity amongst the student athletes, the teachers, the students. What's going on across all perspectives, and oftentimes a little bit deeper. But it's really, really important that you get people to understand NIL is not the goal. Education is. As this continues to flourish, it's not about how do we get kids NIL activity deals. It's about how do we educate kids to keep them safe and compliant and moving forward in the best way in whatever that looks like. There's something I call the NIL continuum. And I always try to get people to look at your school and where this fits from an application standpoint. So there's levels. There's 4 levels. Level 1, we have a policy. Now, do you know if your state has a policy, your association has a policy, does your school have a policy? Most independent private schools have an additional policy because there are things that they don't want their student athletes doing. Or there's a disclosure policy. Public schools even, what does that look like? What are student athletes required to do? Number 2, how are we educating our families, or are we educating our families? And that's often where 1 and 2, they kind of stop, right? Then it's to getting to level 3, we intentionally teach NIL schools. So does your school intentionally teach NIL skills in some manner? You do. It's just figuring out what does that look like from a value add perspective? And then the last one, the level 4, we have a structured NIL education pathway. And I'll show you an example of that here in a second. And when you look at this continuum, it's not to make you feel bad if you're not on level 1, or it's not to make you feel great if you're on level 4. It's to say this continuum is not changing. And for a lot of people right now, they're becoming more and more interested in what can we do from a support service perspective to help move our school in a positive, proactive pathway. Like I said, most people end on level 2. Level 3, which I think is where you start to see the real strategic movement and proactivity, it requires a couple questions. And I think school counselors are almost the best ones to ask these questions because they see it all pieced together. Number 1, where do applications of NIL skills fit within our curricular and support services offerings? Not how are we helping kids get NIL deals? What's the rules? Where are the applications of what kids need to learn or what they're interested in learning fit within what we're already doing, which is amazing? And then how do those applications align with our educational goals for all of our students, right? And this isn't just about student athletes. When you can get past that process and you can have those conversations, this is where schools start to use this as what many want to as the competitive advantage. So when I look at this, I look at a level 3 curriculum integration, right? So almost all of your schools are teaching these pieces: personal branding, social media, financial literacy, entrepreneurship, legal business, recruiting, NIL, some manner, way, shape, or form, right? And when you look at it, you break it down. I taught business at the high school level. If I was teaching a business class right now, it would probably be full to a T, because I would be using project pathway that I could with a national phenomena of NIL that kids are interested in, right? We do a contract review one day, be like, okay, here's 2 contracts. One has things that are beneficial for the student, one that doesn't. Go and find them. What does that look like? There's so many different avenues to help teachers improve some of those pieces or connect with students in a different way. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with what they're currently doing, but what it does is it gives them additional value if they choose to move that way moving forward. And it gives kids and families a way to discuss some of those conversations that maybe you aren't able to have all the time through their homework or their school engagement or course curriculum. And then getting to level 4, and Jeff and I, we just had a meeting with Union a little bit earlier, and I've worked with them for the last 4 or 5 years in a lot of different ways. They have a program called SOAR. It's Safety, Opportunity, Awareness, and Responsibility. It's an NIL education program that's across their entire athletic department and moving into the academic environment, where what they do is it's built on a program framework of those 4 pieces. There's a compliance first, a safety always, and then an applied learning piece, right? Because if you can get past just how do we not just scare them, how do we truly help them through the application of learning of educational processes through this national phenomena, NIL, that's how you're going to win with this. You're not going to win by just, hey, allowing people to talk about, oh, that kid got NIL deals, et cetera, et cetera. Their program structure offers 2 different types of pieces: a monthly seminar series and a SOAR NIL elective course. And I was in Texas working with a school that was considering doing a 3-level course where there was going to be an NIL basics, there was going to be a mental health identity piece, there was going to be, so every school does this a little bit differently, but this can be a passion point for a lot of educators internally. You'll see some of that seminar series and what that looks like, from a workshop to an activity, getting them to understand some of those pieces and prepare moving forward in a way that is engaging for them in an interest area that they might have. And then the last piece is that connected infrastructure. And you know, I've gotten to know Jeff a little bit over the past couple months, and what is important is when you start to see those levels and you're moving up into the levels, is how do we connect, right? The educational component, the safety compliance component, the college counseling component, and what does that infrastructure look like? In Polaris, I've been beyond impressed from that perspective as it ties it all together and gives a repository. And ultimately, getting you all to understand is you don't need to become NIL experts. You just simply need to continue doing what you've always done with an additional lens. And that's helping students make informed decisions, develop healthy identities, and prepare for life beyond high school. NIL is just now part of the conversation. It doesn't mean it's going to be a conversation that has to happen all the time, but I'm going to tell you, I think the evolution of what this looks like from an entrepreneurial standpoint, especially for independent schools or private schools and even public schools that have very high achieving students, you're going to see a real interest in the entrepreneurial side, not just for student athletes, but more so for the students moving into that next realm. And how are we supporting and almost lighting that fire a little bit deeper in a unique way through different curricular questions and improvement support services. At the end of the day, again, NIL is not the goal. Education is. And when you do that, you have a chance to win and support the people in your community the way in which I believe is truly the most beneficial for their movement forward. So with that being said, I know that was a lot. I told you on the front end it was going to be a lot, so I'm not taking hits on that one. But what questions do you have? We can go back through anything. Anything is open game. I will help in any way I can.
Scott, I'm first and foremost, thank you. I'm actually amazed with the number of slides that you were able to get through in under an hour. I had a little prop bet on the side that, but yeah, no, that's incredible. And to your point, I feel as though as educators, we've never experienced something quite like this before, where truly we do have lightning in a bottle from a project-based learning standpoint. And with the advancement of AI recently and families questioning the cost of college, a return on investment there, degree relevance, I feel as though pushing NIL in the lane of entrepreneurship and really opening kids up to this earlier in terms of how they can connect those interests, strengths, values, aptitudes with their long-term aspirations, but through the entrepreneurial lens.
Yep.
I don't know if we've ever seen anything like this before, or if we ever will see anything like this again in the future, just in terms of education, across the board. But
yeah, and it's funny you say that, because I truly, when I talk to school principals and ADs, like I always tell them, especially ADs, this is probably the first time ever where you have something occurring in the national landscape that crosses the bridge from an educational based athletics perspective, right? Where like you can help create passion and improvements in the educational setting by just helping people understand, what does this look like, right? Without being scared, like, I don't want to touch that. I'll just make a policy and no way can do that. Like, they're going to do it and kids are interested. So how do we make sure that they're doing that safely while also using it as the connectivity point with, I just think about, again, I think about when I taught, like, you tell me this is happening right now, I'm in, like, let's go. And I think there's just so many ways that kids are going to continue to figure out who they want to be and what they want to be as they move forward by using this as a educational tool, rather than just like, oh, NIL activity because I'm a good basketball player. It doesn't matter. Good for you, but that's not the goal.
Yeah. And to your point on the extension throughout the community, throughout the various other stakeholders within a school ecosystem, I do feel like that's the one thing that will never change for us is, we only, as humans, have 24 hours in a day. So how can we collaboratively incorporate the gifts and strengths and talents of others to also meet this moment, just with the economic opportunity that's there for this generation? And I do feel like that's where, as an extension of that, driving home as well, that NIL, everyone possesses a name, image, likeness, and voice, so they can really drive it, in that direction that aligns with those interests of theirs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nobody wants to ask a question. It's okay.
Well, thank you, Scott. This has been incredible. And again, very well detailed. Scott's contact information is down there at the bottom. Definitely also keep in mind, moving forward, we're going to be continue to onboard programs, college counseling and athletic departments into our Polaris athlete pilot program. And there's an administrator cohort with that as well, in which we'll have monthly meetings, quarterly meetings is our cadence, virtual, of course. And then more so than anything else, we want to just bring thought leaders together at the table, drive that research and development for the platform in terms of being able to meet this moment for student athletes alike. And above all else, knowing that we're pushing the most trustworthy resources and educators and contributors in the direction of student athletes to help meet that moment and provide those families and schools with what they need at this time. Thank you, everyone. I'll be getting this recording out here in the next couple of days, and stay tuned for next week. I'll have an announcement with our July 10th, July 13th, and July 24th sessions that'll be coming up. We'll be covering topics specific to college counseling, athlete mental health, as well as early graduation and early enrollment, which has become an increasing trend in our landscape as well. So thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a good rest of your day, y'all.